to order at 4:02 p.m. And we would like to do our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks, Okanagan peoples, and the Splatsin of the Secwepemc Nation. I'd like to, first of all, get a motion to adopt the June 23rd, 2024 agenda for the Committee of the Whole meetings. We have a mover, Councillor Drapala, seconder, Councillor Todd. And next, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 13th, 2024 be adopted. We have a mover, Councillor Wayner, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nietzsche. And sorry, thank you. Thanks for getting me tuned in again. All those in favor for, the Committee of the Whole, May 13th, and also for the this agenda, and that'll be carried, both of them. Thank you. And next, Ms. Cordell, you're going to present to us again some of the things that we didn't quite get through last time. And on that note, I will allow it in your capable hands.
Thank you, Your Worship. So today, my presentation really focuses on options for a sliding scale density in the zoning bylaw that was presented to you at the last meeting. I've provided a bit of a report summarizing what the options are, and we're looking at four options, I would say. So one would be the one that was presented in the zoning bylaw, which was an extra unit for every 100 meters squared. The second one would be an extra unit for every 150 meters squared. The third would be an extra unit for every 200 meters squared. And then the fourth is looking at putting a cap on the land area that was used in those calculations at 4,000 square meters, because that is sort of the cap where the province uses to treat them as a larger parcel where they only have less units. So we've developed some scenarios so you could see what that would mean on the ground. My only hesitation that I want to remind you of before we go looking at these is that while creating a smaller number of units through the sliding scale might seem like a better option, it may drive people to just subdivide the parcels into a whole bunch of small parcels rather than do comprehensive site planning and create clusters of buildings and nodes. So that's the reason that I've presented this suggestion of a sliding scale of density, so that we can encourage people to develop the parcels holistically rather than chopping them up into small pieces, which every of those small pieces would be eligible for 4 units. So I'm going to just share with you this basically the same presentation. Philippa? Oh, there we go. No, it's good. Share. It's basically the same presentation that we did at the last council meeting, but what I've done is shown what it would look like with those additional densities. So let me start the slideshow so we can see it. Okay, so you'll be familiar with these properties. Again, we took a random selection of properties throughout the city just to show different configurations. This is a property on Burns Avenue that is 0.03 hectares or 303 square meters. It would be allowed 4 units under this, regardless of the sliding scale density, because it's too small for any additional units. This is one of the units in the Meadow Creek Lane development. Again, it's 340 square meters, so it would only be allowed 4 units, no additional units. And I say only because, of course, it seems unlikely to get 4 units on there, but obviously in urban situations, people are getting that level of density. 2285 Fletcher Avenue. This one is 910 meters squared. So it would be allowed the 4 units for the first 420 square meters. And then after that, you can see if we applied different sliding scales. So at 100 meters squared, it would be up to 8. At 150, it would be up to 7. And at 200 meters squared, it would be up to 6. Total, those are the totals. Because they would get, so the way I've done it is the extra that they would get is here, so they would get an extra 4, which would bring it to 8. 2380 Fletcher, again with the R1 zone, it's 603 meters squared. So it would get the 4 units on the base density, and then it would have 1 additional if we're at 100 meters squared, which would give it 5. It would still only be allowed 1 additional at 150 meters squared and no additional at 200 meters squared on the sliding scale. 3730 Wood Avenue, if it was in this zone, so it's 870 meters squared. It would get the 4 units under the base. And then at the 100 meters squared, it would be allowed 4, 150 would be allowed 3, and 200 would be allowed an additional 2. So you can see the totals there, 8, 7, and 6 consecutively. This is a large parcel on Sage Avenue. So you can see here, 3,844 meters squared. Base units would be 4. Under the extra units, so at 100 meters squared, they'd get an extra 34, taking them to 38, an extra 22, taking them to 26, and an extra 17, taking them to 21 under the 200 meters squared scenario. This parcel off of Rosedale is 18,000 meters squared, so it's quite a large parcel. It would be allowed 4 base units, and then under the 100 meters squared one, it would be an additional 177 to take it to 181, an additional 118 to 122, an additional 88 to take it to 92. And in this one, we could look at if council was considering having a cap of density stopping at the 4,000 square meters. So they would be allowed, the extra units would come. My math isn't, yeah, so the extra units would just come in at 39, 27, or 21 in that one, because we stopped at 4,000 square meters. This parcel on Van Cleek, 2145 Van Cleek, you can see the numbers here. Again, this is 4,819. So if we cap, or without the cap, you'd be 47, 33, 25. With the cap, it'd be 39, 27, 21. So not a huge difference on this one because it's just over that 4,000 square meters. And then these ones are the same. These are the apartment zones. So I haven't changed anything in them. Looking at up to 100 units per hectare, or if 50% of them are below market value, 150 units per hectare. So encouraging the development of some subsidized housing. This is Harlan Park Road, so it would be allowed 59 and 88 if there were subsidized units, which is about what they were looking for in their development plan. So it fits it quite nicely. So that is kind of at a high level what those different scales could look like. My recommendation to you today is that we consider looking at the third option, the 200 meters squared. So I think that is a smaller amount of density than would be allowed if they subdivide into small parcels. But it's enough density that may encourage some people not to go through the process of subdividing into parcels. That's it's kind of trying to walk a fine line here, because we don't want everyone dividing the whole town up into little tic-tac 420 meter squared parcels. It'd be nice to preserve more green space and to have some shared amenities if they could do it as a holistic plan. So with that, I guess, any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? It's still a lot of density. But I mean, that's what the province is pushing us for, is really high, a lot higher density than we're used to in Armstrong. So we used 4,000 square meters because in the provincial guidelines, they kind of treat parcels over 4,000 square meters differently in the rules. So the rules for under 4,000 square meters are that you have to allow 4 units based on the parcel size. But for the large parcels over 4,000, we just had to allow a carriage house and a secondary suite. So we just picked it as a line that the province has drawn, and we thought it made some sense to correlate with that. We could use a different number, but we were just choosing a number that the province had thrown out for a different level of density.
Thank you.
Councillor Todd.
And we could do option 3 and the 4,000 as well. It's not just one or the other, it's both.
That's correct.
No further questions on that? Seeing no further questions, then. Oh,
So
Councillor
I
Bevan.
guess these numbers still make me nervous, and I understand that that's the intention of the province to diversify, or sorry, to densify. It's concerning for our infrastructure, I guess, when it's such a small town. I'm just trying to think through in my head as like, is there still a different way to get at this? What if we, like, what would it look like in town? How many properties do we have that are over that 4,000?
I don't have the numbers of that in front of me, but we could take a different approach. We could say you're only allowed 4 units on parcels that are 420 square meters. Most of the parcels that we have that are larger than 4,000 are in the ALR or not serviced by sewer. So this doesn't really impact them because they'll have the A1 zoning or the country residential zoning, which only allows 3 units max. This is more for, there's a couple parcels that have residential zoning within town. But we could definitely figure out exactly how many there are for you. I have a spreadsheet that we'd be able to search that fairly easily. All that they will have to do though is so we could either apply a country residential zone to any of those larger parcels, which we could do, and then they would just apply to rezone, which will no longer involve a public hearing, and it would be a fairly straightforward process for them to rezone to the R1 zone. I don't know if there's benefit to adding extra administrative steps or not. in
Right,
that.
I would agree to not add administrative steps where possible. I'm just trying to think of different ways to have checkpoints. So if someone applies for a subdivision application, that has to come through council, right?
No,
Oh,
subdivision is a process separate from council. What you would see in some of the larger parcels when they were developing them is the development permit. Because anything that develops that number of units will require a development permit, and that would come to council for consideration and input. And then if they required any variances on any of the zoning setbacks or anything like that.
right. And then, sorry to keep asking all these questions. The 100, 150, and 200 meter squares were just our choice too, right? Those didn't come from anywhere.
That's correct, yeah. We were just looking for easy numbers to create the sliding scale that just was logical. For the provincial numbers, it works out to something like, oh, and I had this in the math in my head, 80 square meters per unit, something like that. So this is bigger than what they were thinking. And I think that we tried to make it so it was a little bit bigger than what they were thinking, but still fit the intent of their legislation. So these people could divide them into a whole bunch of 420 square meter lots if they wanted to.
Councillor Nietzsche has a question.
Yeah, thank you. So Lori, the purpose of the sliding scale is essentially that you're trying to avoid people making multiple subdivision requests on some of these smaller lots, as given the fact that we have some larger lots within the community that are potential, subdivision candidates, right? At the time of subdivision though, just so council is clear, that's when it triggers things like road dedication, cash in lieu of parkland dedication. Is that the time too that would trigger the development cost charges at the time of subdivision, or does that happen at the development permit stage?
Through your worship to Councillor Nietzsche, that could happen at either the building permit or at the subdivision
At subdivision
stage, if once we create development cost charges.
Thanks a lot, Lori. I just find it really hard to picture our community in 20 or 25 years with this rule that we don't get to choose how we want our community to look. And, we were ahead of the game, allowing suites and carriage houses and all that kind of stuff. And, if we're finding ourselves in a difficult situation, I can't imagine what the communities are thinking that haven't already allowed secondary suites, carriage houses, etc. So I just, oh man, it's really hard. It's really hard. Especially, I just actually spent some time today looking up the size of our property. And we could have an apartment block there. And it just blows my mind that nobody could stop you from doing that.
So can I?
In
address
reality,
that?
I
Yeah.
know that an apartment block is overdoing it, but just the
Yeah.
whole concept of having so many, somebody buying the property and having so many options of how many families, as long as we have the infrastructure to supply it, is what just, like at what point do we get to have any say in our own community? None. I mean, I understand that. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I just find this so hard, having lived here for 115 years already. It's just hard to see it all go down
I know.
to no choice.
Just through your worship to Councillor Fowler, one of the thing, well, there's a couple things about this that, it's a big thing for a small community to adapt to. These are definitely urban Vancouver style densities that we're not used to. Some of the studies show that uptake on the units isn't high, especially in the more rural communities. So even if we put these rules in, people have to want to live there. There has to be a market for them, for developers to build them to that density. And additionally, the infrastructure upgrade costs are going to be prohibitive in a lot of situations to the development of these. So while we have to allow it in our zoning bylaw, and we have to not have a public hearing, and we have to do a bunch of things, in reality, a lot of the places and a lot of the conversations that we've started to have with people is showing that the cost of upgrading the infrastructure is going to make the projects not that viable for them to build. I don't know that this is going to cause the kind of change that we're afraid of, because who moves to Armstrong to build to that density, right? People move to Armstrong because they like their backyards and their gardens and their greenery. There has to be a market for those kind of units. I think we'll see some, but I don't think we'll see a mass uptake in the development of these. I mean, we've allowed carriage houses for how long? And we've got a handful. I think we've got more secondary suites maybe than we realize. But at the same time, I don't see people flooding in to build these units in our community.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that, but when somebody builds a carriage house, it's usually somebody who's got enough property on their land that's empty, and they're just inviting one other family to live there. What I see, and I'm not talking about it happen, like our Kerry, it's not going to happen tomorrow. We're looking into the future and trying to plan what's best for our community. And I understand we don't have a choice. I get that. But it's not who wants to put more families on a certain size property that already live in Armstrong. It's the fact that developers can come here and they can build property where you've got 3 or 4 families in there. And if you build it, they will come. So it's not the people who live on the size, like a third of an acre in the middle of town, which sounds excessive, but it's what we've done all our life. I don't feel I've lived an excessive life. But the people around, the neighbors that you develop, I mean, that's who you're really messing things up for. And again, it's the people who will come to do this development. And again, I'm just rambling. It's hard. So let's just do the best we can and face the devil.
Councillor Velster.
Thank you, Mayor Kramer. Just a couple of questions regarding subdivision. With the current rules, if we went on this style and someone has a big enough property to say put up, I don't know, 30 units, that would be 30 units on one parcel of land. And the idea of the sliding scale is so that they're not subdividing. Now, in the event that we say we cap it at 4, and then we force everyone to subdivide, and they subdivide it, now they're not putting in an apartment building type thing. They've got all of these lots where they can build a maximum of 4 non-connected units, right? So instead of an apartment building shooting up, we're limiting the developers to smaller sections of land where they have to build access and all that kind of stuff. Am I correct in that thought?
I think you're on the right track. The one tweak I would say is you can't build an apartment in this zone. Yeah, the heights don't allow it. And what we would most likely see is a variety of townhouses, right? Connected townhouses or not connected townhouses. The benefit of that is that there's a potential for more green space and for shared amenities rather than dividing it into all the parcels so they can have the 4 units. So, while it will make it maybe more dense together, it can provide for more green space and more amenities overall, maybe more buffering between the neighbors. They'll still have to follow the setbacks. They'll still only be allowed 50% site coverage. So some of those things really restrict what you can do. But it wouldn't be an apartment. Otherwise, you're in the right direction.
Okay.
Councillor Weiner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've mulled over this for a great deal of time, and I have to say I'm not happy about it. I'm not excited about it at all. It has the potential to have quite a negative impact on our community and the character of our community. I've looked at the numbers and I understand the 200 square meters versus the 280 and the incentives that are there and how challenging this is because a lot of it's unknown as to what's going to happen here. But a lot of the direction that we're going in makes a lot of sense to me. There are some pieces that, like Councillor Valstar pointed out, as far as how the developers might interpret things and adjust them. But I mean, your background and expertise, which I'm relying on to guide us in that direction as far as what's going to be best for the character of our community. So what I'm seeing here, as much as I don't like it, it might be the best worst case scenario that I can see so far. So thank you.
Councillor Drapala.
Yeah, I like the approach. The numbers on the high end for those few properties are just too much of a risk for me, I think. And so whatever we need to do to so this is my thought, to make me comfortable would be to figure out a way to cap those particular properties, whether that's putting it into a country residential zone or whether that's moving that to 400 meters squared and letting them go through a subdivision application process. I think that's more kind of honest to what would be happening on those properties instead of taking a large chunk of property and kind of creating your own little development. I just think it's more along the lines of the intention of stuff. And then especially if we're capturing development cost charges at the subdivision stage, then if they're doing that much development on a property, then hopefully we're recouping some of those fees back for the community.
Councillor Nietzsche.
Yeah, thank you. And that's kind of the point that I'm getting to is that I like the sliding scale for some of these smaller lots. It's the larger lots that trigger a mass density change that I almost think that we would be better to go to the subdivision process to trigger all of the extras that the city could possibly collect, being the development cost charges and cash in lieu and et cetera, unless I'm getting that wrong, but
Those would be, they would be collected either way.
either way.
Yeah.
Okay, either way, we'll still collect all those. Okay, I just want to make sure that we weren't circumventing that subdivision process and then, foregoing some of those fees, but even under this scheme, we would be, okay, that's good. That clarifies it for me then. Thank you.
We did not actually get a resolution on the table, so I think at this point in time, though we've had our discussion, and then we can make an amendment that the committee of the whole recommends to council that staff update the draft zoning bylaw to reflect the sliding scale density of an additional unit of every 200 meters squared over the 410 meter squared threshold. Mover, please. Seeing none. Thank you, Councillor Nietzsche. Is there a seconder? Councillor Todd. We can continue with the discussion. I think at this point, Lori's been able to answer most of our questions, and it's not like it's something that that's been just dreamed up on a whim. We are legislatively required to do something, and we do have a time limit on it. I'm open to adjustments, certainly to the bylaw. If I was to throw my support behind something, it would be the 200 meter square sliding scale proposal. And if there's anything else that we could add to that to give us some more control on our larger parcels, I would also support something along that lines. Councillor Velster.
Thank you, Mayor Kramer. My fear of it is so maybe we could take Shirley's place for a specific example, is that someone buys that, realizes that they can throw 38 units on it, and they put 38 11-meter high townhouses in that neighborhood. And it's scary is just kind of my feeling behind it. And I understand that the province is making us do something, and that if somebody wanted to, that they could. And I kind of like where Councillor Drapula was going with the cap and making them subdivide. I like that, but that's more of a comment more than that's the question.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, it's a scary proposition not to have any choice in the matter, but we don't. What we can do is minimize the damage. And I think this goes a long way to minimizing the damage that will be caused. I think the site coverage will be helpful, because you might not be able to put 38 pieces of property on Shirley's, it might only be 4 or 5. It's just, we have to do everything we can to make sure that it doesn't get too big and too ugly. So that's my point of view.
Councillor Drapula.
Sorry, and I guess I just want to clarify a little bit, and I know we're getting our points across for sure, but maybe if we can stick to one of these, I like the property that's up there to use as an example, because we actually have some numbers, and I'm just worried that we're kind of envisioning different things in our heads as we're discussing, because we'll have, we still have the height restrictions, right? And so we still have site coverage. And so I guess I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. For me personally, if I'm looking for a limit, is it better on a property like Sage to change the whole sliding scale, for the whole community, to 400 meters squared? So that would still allow, say, just for ease, an extra 10 units on there, right? So that would be 14 units on Sage. Or is it better to change the zone to country residential? Or is it better to put a cap overall and say anything you want to go above 8, then you have to trigger some other process?
So, through your worship to Councillor Drapla, the thing about changing it to country residential will be, they can just apply to change it back to R1, right? So if the R1 isn't restrictive enough, then it's just makes one more step for them, but it doesn't really fix your concern because they could just change it back to R1. So I guess to address that concern would be the cap, but of course they can always get around that just by subdividing it into a whole bunch of parcels, which would allow more than the 200 meters squared would allow.
Councillor Todd.
So the changing of the zoning, we have no say about that at all? They can just come in and say, it's just a rubber stamp at that point?
I think, so my understanding is that zoning is at council's discretion, but you wouldn't have much of a rationale for it if it was challenged, right? If it, especially on these properties that are already in town and were previously zoned R1 or R2. I mean, I think zoning is always at council's discretion. You could say no. But I think it would be a challenging decision. So if we have stuff in our OCP that says the larger parcels can't be developed in that way, but again, I think it goes against the intent of the act, and we have to be really careful about going against the intent of the act. Even in the proposed zoning bylaw, where we've looked at more parking, bigger setbacks than the province is recommending, we're going to have to rationalize that to the province and explain why we're doing it. But some of those things will help with the protecting these parcels, because I mean, the numbers you see up there don't consider topography, they don't consider hazards, they don't consider setbacks, they're just a flat calculation based on parcel size, right? So they likely won't be able to be reached, never mind the infrastructure upgrades, which would be significant for a lot of these.
Also wanted to comment just that though we live in a wonderful community, I'm not seeing this rapid expansion and growth here before I would see it in many other municipalities that have different amenities offer and whatnot. So I really think it's kind of like Councillor Wayner suggested, is that we make the best of a bad situation. We are legislatively required to do so, and I don't know, I'm just looking for that right motion to capture it so we can still have some say, but this is progress. Unfortunately, we're being moved forward. Councillor Bellstar.
Thank you. One more thing, and this might sound like a silly question, but what is the negative part of somebody coming in and subdividing a big piece of land?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. So for me, what I see is, and I was trying to find a really good example of this out in the world, is if you're subdividing it, you're going to end up with a lot of separate little parcels with small little setbacks, with kind of more ticky-tacky is what I would call it, to get in the maximum number of units. So they'll be kind of set in an alignment. You'll see lots of them the same, with houses taking up as much space as you can. If we were able to look at a parcel and have them develop it holistically, they would be able to put the units closer together, leave more green space, have some community amenities, maybe provide a common area where they can have a little park, and we would be able to control some of that through the development permit process. So I think it allows us to have a more holistic perspective on what it's going to look like as a whole. They probably likely would do that as a strata as well, or as rentals. So it kind of encourages different property ownership kind of styles as well.
Okay, so yeah, I definitely see the value in not doing that. And I think 200 meters squared sounds like the best option, I guess.
Councillor Drapla.
I think, I don't know, just before it goes to a vote, I'm still not comfortable at 200 meters. I would be more inclined to vote in favor of the motion if that was a higher So I don't know if 400 meters is that too big? To be honest, I'm not super worried about that subdivision phase. I think it creates enough of there's enough restrictions when you're creating your new properties within that property, right? That I think it would prevent some of that. But I guess is 400 justifiable even? Like, so if we create that is the province going to turn around and say, hey, 400 is way too big, go back?
Through your worship to Councillor Drapla, I don't think the province, I mean, from the province's perspective, allowing the 4 is required. But what I would be worried about at the 400 would be that they would then just decide to subdivide instead, right? And then we would have a lot more requests for more city infrastructure and roads, and yeah. So I guess if you're more comfortable with that, then you're more comfortable with that. But I feel like 200 kind of strikes a bit of a balance.
What about 300? Yeah.
I'll be totally honest with you. This is an unknown area. We've never kind of gone down this road before, right? This is going to be simplifying our zoning bylaw dramatically. These densities are big for us. I mean, they'd be big in Vernon, never mind in Armstrong, right? So it's going to be a challenge. And I mean, in one way, we're relying on the quality of our infrastructure right now to kind of slow some of that growth down, which is a weird thing to say. But.
Councillor Todd.
I think at $451 a square foot to build at the moment, or whatever it is, it's not necessarily going to be a gold rush out there. So I think, well, it's an ugly proposition anyway we look at it, but we have to do something. So I think 200 might be the way.
Councillor Wayner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just if we zone it as R1, it sounded to me like there would potentially be an extra step, but we weren't totally sure on what may or may not allow the change. Can you maybe clarify that a bit more for me?
Through your worship to Councillor Wayner, I think that was if we zoned it country residential. Yes, so then they would just have to apply for rezoning to R1. So it is an extra step for them, and I guess it would be an opportunity for council to say no. But yeah, I'm nervous about what would happen if we took properties that are already zoned R1 or R2 and.
We do have some of them that are currently country residential, if I recall, because a lot of those got
Yes.
switched to R1. There are, I think, 2 or 3 of those. And then in my mind, I guess my question is, at that point, would we be able to specify any other criteria around the zoning, or would it have to, I guess not? It'd fall into R1, and that's the question in mind. So, and whether or not we allowed that would be the question. So we'd be waiting until the future to see if this density continues, whether or not the province continues pushing this density. Would be the only. I'm mulling this over. Thank you for entertaining. All right, I'm tempted to look at the R1 zoning for some of those properties, but some of the larger lots, at least, I think Councillor Drapala's point kind of resonated as the fear of those larger lots and what that might look like and how that impacts the community. I don't see a solution though.
Yeah, we're in a difficult position where we're being told that we need more density, right? It's a challenge.
And we're not 100% sure how many of those large ones we have in the community that aren't in the ALR or just aren't developable, really.
I have the data on that,
Yeah.
but I didn't bring it with me.
But there's not a lot.
There's not a ton of them. There are a few though. And some of them have no sewer access is the other thing, right? So they wouldn't be supported. I think that would be our trigger to say no if they applied to go to R1, that they don't have sewer service.
And we charged to change the zoning. It isn't a free, they have to pay something to come in and change
Yeah.
the zoning.
There's a fee for a zoning
Can we
amendment.
jack that up?
I mean, council sets the fees when we annually review the fees and charges. But we have to be able to justify it. Yeah. Yeah.
We do have a motion on the table. I'm not necessarily satisfied that all of council is ready to move forward, even though I understand we have some time limits on this. If there's more information required, is this something that council wants some more information, or are we as our council ready to make a decision? Councilor Draplin.
Are we able to adjust this in a year or 2 years' time?
Through your worship to Councillor Drapla, we can revisit our zoning bylaw at any time as long as we still fall within the legislative parameters. So yeah, if we tried it for a year and we found it wasn't working and we wanted to try something different, we certainly could. We would just have to look at how many parcels had taken advantage of it in the meantime for creating nonconformities.
I think even as an interim, then while we see kind of how things roll out over the next while, I'd be more comfortable voting in favor with an amendment to 300 meters. I mean, it just cuts down a little bit less on some of those big properties. I would hate for someone to take advantage of this, not a loophole, but kind of just getting ahead of the wave in the next year or so, where they see this as an opportunity and they come in and try to make some money on stuff, and then maybe the projects get finished, maybe they don't. But you're right in the sense that it's only going to be economically viable if they can have a lot of units. And so if we can somehow cap the number of units even in the short term, then those projects don't become kind of ripe for people coming in and taking advantage of that opportunity.
If this was something that was to
Yeah.
be challenged by somebody, are our odds any better moving to 300 meters squared versus 200 meters squared from a justification perspective?
Your worship, from a justification perspective, we've met the minimum from the province of allowing 4 units per 282 square meters. So we're okay from that perspective. What we'll just see is people getting around it by applying to subdivide into smaller parcels. That's all.
So yeah, I'll put an amendment on the table if mover and seconder.
Well, moved by Councilor Drapla, second by Councilor Nietzsche, that the amendment be changed, an additional unit for every 300 meters squared over the 410. Councilor Weiner.
Just wanted to comment to that for the discussion point. My fear is that it's at 280 square meters for, a 4-unit lot. And if I'm looking at the math, otherwise, if they subdivided that same lot, it's going to have a lot more units on it. And I see this having the counter effect that we're looking to have. And as much as I hate to do it, I think I might fall back on the advice of our staff to look at the 200 square meters.
Any further questions or comments? We do have a amended motion on the table, which I'm about to call the vote. Seeing no further comments or question, all those in favor to the amended motion, raise your hand. The amended motion, yes. So that will reflect all other than Councillor Weiner. Yes, Philippa?
Just a quick question. That was, you were carried the motion to amend the main motion just then, so you still have to do the whole complete motion.
Okay, thank you. There we go. And then, so now it'll be a vote on the new motion, which is the additional unit every 300 meters squared over the 410 meter bylaw. Call the question. All those in favor? And now it will be unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cordell, for your information on a very confusing topic. All right, and at this point in time, I believe the committee of the whole business is over. I'd like to, resolution to adjourn the meeting, please. Moved by Councillor Bellstar, seconded by Councillor Todd. All those in favor? And